Thanks for joining us again. Sadhus are one of the most prominent symbols of India for those people outside the country. I think it's safe to say right along with Taj Mahal, tigers, forts of Rajasthan, Himalayas, beaches of Goa, all the other things that appear in Indian travel literature. Guys that wear dreadlocks, wear little to no clothing, often covered in sacred ash, are right up there. But what we're going to do today is try to demystify these mystic guys, mostly men. There's some women, we'll get to that, by answering some frequently asked questions, or maybe some questions that aren't explicitly asked, but probably should be, because people seem to have all sorts of ideas about sadhus. So let's kick it off with what are sadhus?
So the word sadhu in Sanskrit, it comes from a root that means straight or direct, going straight to a goal. So the technical definition is in Hindu and Jain dharmas. Sadhus are people who have decided to go directly to the goal of moksha, or kaivalya for Jains, rather than pursuing any other goals, such as artha, kama, participating in social norms, enjoying sensory pleasures, having a job. They've dropped everything else and they're going for moksha alone. The term does also get used by Buddhists and Sikhs, but in those traditions, it has pretty significantly different meanings. But I think mostly we're talking about Hindu sadhus, and Jain sadhus are very similar. So it means like a full-time spiritual practitioner, someone who doesn't do anything else. Their entire life is based around their practice of sadhana aimed at moksha.
How is that different than between monks or swamis? Is there how does that play out? Because a swami, traditionally, one thinks of somebody who's dedicated their life full-time to some sort of spiritual service.
Yeah. So monk is an English word. It doesn't have a standardized exact definition as applied to dharma traditions, but people would commonly translate either sadhu or swami as monk. Swami literally means someone who is self-realized or self-controlled. It's a title that some orders of renunciates will give to their initiates. Swami tends to be more of a formally granted title when you undergo a certain initiation. Sadhu is generally more of an informal term. The same person very well might be called both. In popular usage, this is kind of a modern association, people tend to associate sadhu with the image that you described in the intro: matted locks, naked or minimal clothing, smeared in ashes. Swami tends to be more associated with orange robes, not crazy hair going on. They're not smeared in ash, but these are kind of inconsistent differences, and they're more cosmetic. They're associated with different orders, have different customs in terms of how you wear your hair, what clothes, if any, you wear, and so on. But fundamentally, sadhus and swamis are pretty interchangeable. They're both interchangeable terms. They both mean someone who's decided to engage in full-time spiritual pursuit and giving up the rest of their material lives for that purpose. They're unmarried, and they are the only Hindu spiritual functionaries who are celibate, whereas regular, like temple priests and so on, typically are married and have families.
In previous episode, we've gone over the hundreds of different sub-traditions in the Hindu Dharma traditions. Do all of these have this sort of this component to them, this renuncia component, or how does that play out?
Not all. Many of them do, and many of them don't. Some of them recommend that people remain in their family or in the mode of being part of mainstream society lifelong, and they do their spiritual practices for moksha within that context. So of the different dharma traditions, almost all of the smarta and shaiva dharma traditions do have a sadhu component. A lot of shakta traditions do too. For Vaishnavas, it's more mixed. Some Vaishnavas have sadhus. In fact, the very largest sadhu order is Vaishnava, but some don't. For example, Radha Vallabha Sampradayas, they're all householders. They don't practice sannyasa. The Pushti Marg, which is a big kind of Northwest Indian Vaishnava Sampradaya, they reject asceticism. They very much celebrate householder life. They see it as the celebration of the Rasa Leela as companions of Krishna engaged in family life. A lot of the regional ancestral Hindu dharmas don't have sadhus. So it shows up mostly, in some of the traditions and not in others.
So you mentioned before different orders of sadhus. Well, can you go into some of those, the most prominent ones, and maybe some distinctions between them? Because when I was at the Kumbh Mela last winter, there's a great variety of people. Some people are literally naked. You get surprisingly used to people walking around totally naked in this context. But others look like they're wearing, similarly outfitted Indian clothing, but it's not radically different than traditional clothing in any way. Can you just go into, like, if people are seeing a particular sadhu, is there anything that we can see from how they're dressed, that what order they might belong to?
Yeah. So sadhus who are deeply immersed in this world can look at almost any sadhu and immediately know the order they belong to. There are so many dozens of suborders of them that it would be very difficult for a layperson to learn them all. But the big ones, the biggest one are the Ramanandis, Ramanandi Vaishnava sadhus. They're actually the largest monastic order in Asia and quite possibly in the world in terms of number of members of a single order. They venerate Sri Rama as the supreme being. They won't be naked. You'll see them usually orange robed. A lot of the distinction, if you're looking at them, is what kind of tilaka marking or tripundra marking they wear on their forehead. So the Vaishnavas are going to have what looks like kind of a U drawn over their forehead in different colors and with different details depending on which sub-branch of Vaishnavas. But when it comes to sadhus, they're most often going to be Ramanandis. The Shaivas are going to have the 3 streaks of ash going horizontally, or sometimes just be completely smeared in ash all over their body. Another big one is the Dashanami Sampradaya. They're Smartas. Sources will constantly call the Dashanamis Shaivas. That's incorrect. They're not Shaivas. They're Smartas. They were founded by Adi Shankaracharya. They have 10 sub-branches. Dashanami means the 10 names. Dashanami Sampradaya is like the order of 10 names. So it has 10 sub-orders, each with a name attached to it, like Saraswati or Puri or Giri, which gets added to the end of the name you receive when you take initiation. So if you hear a sadhu's name is like Yogiraj Sri Digambar Purnam Giri, you know that they're part of the Giri branch of the Dashanamis. Or if they're such and such Saraswati, they're part of the Saraswati branch, so on. There are the Aghoris. The Aghoris tend to be the most shocking to conventional sensibilities. They are they're the ones who live in cremation grounds. They're smeared not just with ash, but with human ash. They will, if they're begging alms, they'll use a human skull as the bowl and eat out of it, so on. Those guys are the Aghoris. They're Shaivas. The Nat or Nata Sampradaya, they're also Shaivas. They tend to be the ones who are big into Hatha Yoga. And Hatha, this is ancient Hatha Yoga. So not just like yoga studio yoga, although it does involve more asanas than most of the other sadhus do. But also lots of other Kundalini practices and stuff involving contorting their bodies and stuff like that. If you see sadhus doing complicated looking physical yoga postures, they're most often Nats. There are the Jain sadhus, the Digambaras, the male Digambara, almost all the Digambara sadhus are men, and they're completely naked, 100% naked. Shvetambara Jain sadhus wear white robes, whereas most of the Hindu ones wear orange if they wear anything. Those are most of the big ones. There are the Udasin, which are semi-Sikh. They were originally founded by Guru Nanak's son, one of his sons, Sri Chandra. But the second Sikh guru kicked them out of the Sikhi fold, and they adopted Hindu Smarta Dharma, started doing the Smarta Panchayatana Puja, but they also keep the Guru Granth Sahib. So they're sort of a Hindu-Sikh fusion Dharma of sadhus, and they're actually the only Sikh-adjacent people who have sadhus at all. Those are probably the biggest ones that you'll tend to see at melas. There's dozens more that are smaller, harder to identify specifically.
Got it. It occurred to me, this wasn't in my set list of questions, but I know we've talked about this at least briefly in the past. How can you tell if you're at one of these melas? Sometimes you will be approached by somebody who looks like a sadhu, but you get a little bit of a vibe about them that I'm not quite sure you actually are.
Yeah.
And, they're begging for money and you may be thrown a little bit. Is there any easy way, without having a depth of knowledge and talking to them for a while, to be like, I don't think you're actually a sadhu. I think you're just a guy dressed up as a sadhu who's begging and using this to your advantage.
Yeah, there absolutely are those people. Without having a depth of knowledge, it's tricky because those guys will often do a minimal level of research to try to get the costume right. If you do have a depth of knowledge, you can talk to them and ask, what order you're initiated in, see if their answer matches their tilak, matches what they're carrying with them. Traditionally, from the traditional orders, none of them should be
like actively seeking begging, because that's been my experience. You may have darshan with them and you may talk and you may leave a little donation, but they're not pressuring you to do that.
They're actually specifically told not to pressure. Like when they, in the sadhu orders, regulate begging alms, and they go about, they have instructions like don't go to the same neighborhood on consecutive days because it might start to get annoying to the people who live there. They're not going to be pushy about it. They're supposed to ask once by holding out a bowl. Typically, they're supposed to beg for food rather than for money. And if you don't put something in the bowl after they ask one time, that's it. They move on. If they're hassling you for money, that is not what sadhus are supposed to do.
What about, again, not on the list, but things are popping to my mind for my time this winter, spending a decent amount of time with sadhus. What about these guys who are performing sort of more public austerities? In Varanasi, there was a guy who literally was hanging a cinder block from a piece of cloth tied to his penis and flowing around with it to the amazement of onlookers and attracting donations. I actually talked to a sadhu afterwards, and he was sort of politely, how would you say, he was putting down that guy because he's like, that's a little bit showy. We're not really into that. What's going on with those guys?
Yeah, I mean, some of those guys might be members of genuine sadhu orders. Some of them are showier than others and will do stuff like that, like have extreme body piercings or things like that. The natas tend to be into that as an order. The distinctive thing of the nats, they're also called kanpatas, which means split ears, because they have giant earrings pierced not through the earlobe, but through the cartilage in the middle of the ear, which is very painful. And some of them will have penis piercings and things like that and go naked. The knots are not centralized. They have many different monasteries and they're not under a centralized leadership. Some of them tend to authorize people to do more public shows like that, and other ones sort of frown upon it. And a lot of not sadhus kind of look down on that. There's some difference between different orders along those lines, but some of the penis piercing guys are genuine sadhus.
What's the spiritual purpose of this? If one's dedicating their life to full-time spiritual pursuit, what is the spiritual benefit of that? I've heard in the past, it is, showing you are not the body sort of thing, transcending this. But it seems
showing you're not the body and irrevocably renouncing sex, essentially. They take a vow. Every sadhu takes a vow. Well, technically with a few exceptions, but they're very rare. Almost every sadhu takes a vow of lifelong celibacy when they become a sadhu. Most of them don't do anything as dramatic as mutilate their genitals, but a few do as part of that vow. In certain orders, they're more into that. Most of them don't.
Let's talk about another prominent thing that one sees. There's a lot of marijuana smoking. Some of these guys, I was at the Junakata tent at the Combe, and I thought there was a guy looking at me with malintent, like, why is this white guy sitting down with us? And then I realized he was just so high. He was staring like 50 yards through me, and it had nothing to do with me whatsoever. And I was totally welcome. We had chai and sat there for a long time.
Yeah.
But we don't have to go into the role of marijuana in Hindu spiritual traditions. That's a totally different episode, which I want to do at some point. But what's going on there? And is there a protocol involved? Because frankly, anybody could, even though marijuana is highly illegal in India, one can easily obtain it and participate with these guys smoking pot with a bunch of sadhus. What's the spiritual purpose for that? And what's going on?
Yeah. So again, this is some of the traditions of sadhus use it. Others don't, or even frown on it. The ones who do use it, they tend to be the ones whose Ishta Devata is Shiva, rather than the Vaishnavas and so on. And not all of those even. There's plenty of sadhus whose Ishta Devata is Shiva who don't use marijuana, but the ones who do, and there are indeed a lot of them, they use it to help induce certain altered states of consciousness for meditation or for spiritual insight. I talked to one of them once, a Shaiva sadhu in a cave in the Himalayas that was thick with ganja smoke. The way he put it was that when he wakes up in the morning, he said, I take the name of Shiva and I take the gift of ganja. The gift of ganja is that the name of Shiva just repeats automatically in my head and other thoughts don't come. That was how he put it. So yeah, some of them use it for purposes like that, to kind of aid getting into and maintaining a state of meditative focus. Other ones don't use it. It again is highly inconsistent depends on which order of sadhus you're talking about.
Got it. Let's see. We'll get to how you become a sadhu later. Let's go down on interactions before we back into that.
Sure.
How do you go about actually smoking? Geez, I'm still on marijuana. Talking with sadhus, and what's the protocol? Because it seems like, in my experience, it's fairly easy to sit down and talk to people, but maybe that's because I've been to India enough times. But the interesting thing is that most of the Indians I found who are householders came for a very quick blessing when they see a sadhu, and that's it. There's not a lot of sitting down and experiencing and hearing and asking questions or anything like this, or even just hanging out. Yeah. What's the protocol, and what do you do? Yeah.
So if you want to hang out and speak with a sadhu, and in my experience also, if you want to, it's pretty easy. That does involve knowing some basic Hindu manners, like, pranam to them respectfully. Don't sit pointing your feet at them or at their sacred items. If you're giving them something, don't give it with your left hand. If they give you something, don't take it with your left hand. A lot of them don't speak English. Basic stuff like that. If you want to be sure, like if there's a specific sadhu and you really want an audience with them, then some of them, most of them would be fine with this in my experience, but some of them would be put off if you're wearing any leather. So if you're going out for the specific purpose of talking to sadhus, then don't wear a leather belt, don't have a leather wallet. You might need to take off your shoes to go into wherever they are. And you might want to, if you're taking off shoes and leaving them on the street, you might want to wear shoes, which you wouldn't miss if they're not there when you get back.
That's true. And I'd add sometimes the boundary, at least with sadhus in the street, of where they want you to take off your shoes isn't entirely clear. I've seen Indians, I've seen lots of people fall afoul of that, where somebody looks at you cockeyed because you didn't realize that, oh, wait, this is my space. Take off your shoes.
Yeah. So generally, if that's the case, if it's not clear, if there's no visible demarcation of their sacred space versus the street, then I would just kind of take off your shoes and maybe carry them in your hand as you come close while giving them a look, and they might sort of indicate when you should put them down. But yeah, that definitely is something you can run afoul of if you go all the way up to them with your shoes on. That's a faux pas.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise, a protocol which I have done before, if I really wanted to talk to a specific sadhu, they might be meditating, they might be chanting mantras. You may have to sit and wait for a while. I have sat for over an hour before just to talk to one sadhu who was chanting Lalita Sahasranama, which takes about 45 minutes. He finished it, gave me a look, flipped back. He was reading it from a book. He flipped back to page 1 and started again. I sat there the whole time through again. And after he finished that one, he was like, okay, come on in. And then we had
it sounds like the old, you have to ask 3 times before being initiated thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's about it. Just, and some sadhus are busy doing their own private spiritual practice, don't want to talk to you. So if that's the case, respect it, move on. But plenty of them are happy to talk in my experience.
Except about certain things I found. Is there anything you shouldn't go into? I was having a really nice conversation with this one man in Varanasi who spoke perfect English, because he's not the first person I've encountered this, who had a tech background and then changed his life entirely. And I asked him about his spiritual practice, and he said, that's not a good question. And I said, okay, fine. I wasn't going to push. It was just that we were having such a casual conversation about a number of topics that approached that. But there was a line there that I got up to.
Yeah, so there is a line there, which is that their specific spiritual practices are an initiatory secret. No one is allowed to know the exact details of their private sadhana who hasn't gone through diksha in their order. So that's what that one was. There are ways to talk about it, but you have to be sensitive to like a general description, but like don't, I'm not, make it clear that you're not trying to get at anything which was revealed specifically in the context of their diksha. Yeah. There is another point, which is traditionally sort of taboo with sadhus, although some of them are fine with it and others aren't, which is talking about their life before they were a sadhu.
Yeah. With swamis and monks, I've encountered that too. In this case, he happened to volunteer it.
Yeah, if they volunteer it, fine, but it is considered impolite to ask about anything before they were a sadhu, because ceremonially, that person is considered to have died, and the sadhu is not the same person, but an entirely new person. Their former life is gone, and they have no connection.
So, how do you start in this? How do you become a sadhu? Because, and maybe there's 2 parts to this, because it seems to me that it's still a fraction of the overall ones. But I saw a lot of Westerners, more than I thought I would see on my last trip, both at the Kumbh and afterwards at various places. Westerners who are part of these orders. And that historically has not been the case. It was more than I remember in previous trips to India. Maybe it was just by virtue of where I was in this sort of event.
Sure.
How does one, whether you're a Westerner or not, let's not deal with the Westerners. Let's just do it. How do you traditionally become a sadhu?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same for a Westerner or for anyone else. So all genuine sadhus have been initiated into a sampradaya. So first you find a guru. A guru is essential on the path for becoming a sadhu. It's a complete requirement in 100% of cases, traditional. So you would join Akara, which is a spiritual order where you would live in communal life. You haven't become a sadhu at this point, but you've become a lay member of the Akara. You're living in the community there, in an ashram, and undergoing years of spiritual training, ashram life there as a brahmachari, a trainee under instruction and mentorship of a teacher of whatever tradition you're wanting to join. They might deem you qualified to renounce worldly life. That's their decision. You don't go up and be like, I'm ready to be a sadhu. They tell you if and when they decide you're ready. You might drop hints that you're interested, but it's your guru's call if you're ready. You also have to not have any worldly responsibilities, like you can't have any dependents, children or otherwise, who rely on you, because all of your relationships are about to be permanently severed. So if you had any dependents, you would be abandoning them. So you have to either not have them or show that there's somebody else who's going to take on that responsibility. First, you have to renounce internal qualities, the six, like kama, moha, lobha, krodha, madha, matsaryam, like lust, desire, greed, anger, arrogance, jealousy. I have certainly met some sadhus who made me question how well they had done that part, but that is
I've certainly aggression. I have seen. I've seen a bunch of sadhus get into a physical brawl, and there was a sword involved.
Some of the Naga Baba sadhus in particular are kind of known for that. But then you have to let go of desire for worldly comfort. You're just as happy sleeping on a bumpy tree root covered ground rather than in a bed, and so on. Never getting big meals, so on. You formally renounce your name, your family, all of your possessions. You ceremonially die. You perform your own funerary rites, and your family mourns you as if you died, traditionally, and never again treats you as if you are related to them. And then you undergo diksha from the guru, where you learn your secret spiritual practice that you are not going to discuss with non-dikshitas. For most sadhus, this diksha happens at the Kumbh Mela specifically. You'll wait until the next Kumbh Mela, and it happens there. You take your vow of lifelong celibacy and asceticism. Details vary by the order. Usually you shave your head, and you either renounce clothing if you're never going to wear clothing again, or they give you your saffron robes, or if you're a Shvetambara Jain, your white robes, etc. You get a new name, and you never again go by your old name. Your guru gives you the name. And at that point, if you do all that, then you're recognized as the full-time renunciate of your order. And then it depends on what tradition you're in. They give you guidelines for what to do after that, how to live and practice.
Got it. We've mentioned all of this is exclusively men, but that's not the case. There are some orders of female sadhus, sadhvis. What's the history of that? And I always thought that they were exclusionary, like that there were female orders and most of the orders are male. But I've noticed, at least again, going back a couple months, that there was actually overlap, and I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, there's lots of overlap. There are exclusionary orders. There are orders that are men only. There are orders that are women only. But there's lots of orders that are both and that don't gender segregate strictly. They tend to house them separately. Like there'll be in orders that are mixed gender, they'll have like a men's section of the ashram and a separate women's section. But often they will have men and women in the same ashram in the same order. So the females, they're called sadhvis for females. So more than 90% of sadhus are men currently. But I would say that 1 in 10 being female is about what I've seen in my own personal experience. That does vary depending on where you are, but I've seen quite a few sadhvis. Historically, there actually were a lot more. Government census data from as recently as the early 20th century indicates that at that time, in certain parts of India, female sadhvis were up to 40% of the renunciate population. Not in all of India, but in certain
40%?
Yeah, that high. As in the early 20th century. That's way, way lower today.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some well-known modern sadhvis. There's the Pari Akara is the most prominent female-only order. Trika Bhavanta Saraswati is the head acharya of their order. There's a few others. There's a group in Nepal led by Sadhvi Hemanandgiri that's all women. Yeah, there's a few. There's Sadhvi Bhagavati Saraswati at Paramat Niketan. But yeah, you definitely see sadhvis mixed in. I've seen lots of sadhvis in Uttarkashi, seen a bunch of sadhvis in Kerala and South India. Yeah, they're mixed in there.
I only have a few more questions, but this one I find interesting. How have attitudes towards sadhus changed over the years? because my understanding is that it has. I mean, and even the nature of sadhus, if we'll finish up with that, and it links back to a bunch of Nagababas fighting with one another. But how have attitudes changed?
Yeah, so I think that prior to the British colonial period, a lot more Hindus viewed sadhus with widespread respect and support than they do today. It's hard to say just how many Hindus didn't respect them and just their opinions went unrecorded in official sources. But generally, from the sources, the attitude is of much greater widespread reverence towards sadhus. Today, it's a more complex mix. There's a lot more skepticism. Some have reverence for them. Some have suspicion. Some of them are more politicized, like associated with sometimes publicly supporting certain political causes in modern India. The British made a big difference. The arrival of the British viewed sadhus as a rival authority, a hostile spiritual authority to their own temporal authority over Indians. They kind of portrayed sadhus as unruly, dangerous, called them up to criminal mischief or sedition. There were British police handbooks with guides for how to recognize different sadhu orders because the British police targeted them so often. They banned sadhus from traveling. They made them stay in one place, which disrupted their traditional ways of life. And it also meant that whereas traveling beggars wouldn't become a drain on any one place, if you make them stay in one place, but their vows require them to live off of begging, then it became much more of a burden on the locals. There was also, around Indian independence, and since then, Marxist and neo-Marxist strains of thought among Indian intellectuals sometimes tried to demonize religious figures, like Hindu religious figures, kind of stereotyping sadhus as backward and outdated or absurd. So you got a mix today. In rural India, I find that most people revere sadhus as very sacred, seek their blessings, consult them for wisdom, like talk to them, consult them. Urban Indians, I've seen do what you say. If they go to sadhus at all, it's for a quick blessing and they don't usually stay to talk. A lot of them distrust them because indeed there are plenty of fake sadhus, as we talked about, who exploit people. Not all people dressed as sadhus are genuine, and that has colored people's attitude. They kind of look at them and they're like, I don't know if you're for real or not. Criminals in modern India often disguise themselves as sadhus to hide from the police. That's a well-known thing. And it's actually not entirely new. Even in ancient sources, there's in things like the Artha Shastra and Dharma Shastras, it recommends rajas to send spies into rival territories disguised as sadhus as a cover to move around incognito and spy on the countryside and so on. So there's always been kind of an element of suspicion of like, you don't know what an apparent sadhu is really up to. I think the biggest difference is that begging used to be seen as highly respectful in India, deeply respectful to live by begging. The Western British attitude that came in, and this has become pretty widespread in India, is they very much look down on beggars as like freeloaders, that they're something to look down on. So it's become more of a complicated mix, I think. What people do you think of sadhus now?
Yeah, I got it. I don't know if you know anything about this, but I wanted to end, unless we can talk about anything else we didn't come up with, but my last actually written down question, which goes to the fighting part, is, and the begging, the seeing people as beggars or vagabonds, is that if you go back a couple hundred years, there were actually warrior sadhus, the people who, in addition to their spiritual practice, fought actual battles, not just be over some fight because somebody got angry at one another, but were actually soldiers, essentially.
Yeah.
What's your experience with that, and can you illuminate us any?
Yeah. So this goes back at least to Adi Shankaracharya when he founded the Dashanami Sampradaya, the Order of the 10 Names, which is very prominent in the Kumbh Mela today. Like all the Naga sadhus are part of that and so on. He divided them into two categories, the Shastradhari and the Astradhari. Shastradhari mean the people who bear the sources of knowledge. Astradhari mean weapon bearers, armed order of warrior monks. Those guys were trained with weapon combat. Originally, the idea was that they were defenders of temples against invaders. They fought quite a few battles against Mughals and other Muslim attackers. They fought the British a few times. They also fought each other a few times across different orders when there were some disputes. This shows up if you look at historical records, like one I just came across in research I was doing, not about sadhus, but just about something else, was in 1757, the Afghan emperor Ahmad Shah Abdali Durrani went to massacre all the Hindus in Vrindavana during the Holi festival. He put a bounty on Hindus, 5 rupees per infidel head. There was an army of thousands of Naga Babas there for Holi. They fought the Afghan army head to head. Thousands of Naga Babas died, and they killed as many as they gave as good as they got to a professional army. These guys were clearly like professional level warriors. They got overwhelmed by their attackers' numbers, but they killed about as many as died on their own side. There's lots of stories about this. Some of the sadhu orders claim that they almost assassinated the Mughal emperor Jahangir, that they managed to stab him, but he didn't die. I don't know how well attested that is outside the sadhu order, but they claim to have almost assassinated the emperor. There's a few others. The British, they especially in Bengal, they gave the British kind of guerrilla warfare resistance from 1763, I think, is when that started. I might be slightly off.
So it's before the Raj, but when the East India Company, when the East India Company had their own armies and they would control things were.
It was mostly, they had mostly put down the sadhu resistance in Bengal by 1800. Certainly by 1820, it was a pre-Raj. The British disbanded all of this because they fought against them.
So that was my next question. So the reason you see largely symbolic weapons among sadhus today, some of them could hurt you, but they're clearly not training out there drilling with them. That's because the British disbanded that part of it and morphed it into the peace-loving hippie version of sadhus that we think of today.
Exactly. There's occasional callbacks. Like I remember there was an article in part of rural Bihar, the Juna Akhara posted, I think it was the Juna Akhara. It might have been a different Akhara. Posted guards on girls' schools to protect the schoolgirls from rowdy groups of young men who are harassing them and so on, just as vigilantes. That's the sort of thing they used to do. And there's occasional cases where they still do something like that, but it's become very rare. Some of the Naga sadhus still do wrestling. And Juna Akhara has an armory in their headquarters. They have a armory.
Varanasi, that one? Is that one? Wait. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's their Varanasi headquarters. They have an armory of old, 400-year-old weapons in there. They don't train with them anymore, but that was definitely part of their heritage.
It occurred to me, thinking of a Winston Churchill quote. What is a fakir then? The term. Are we talking? Are we just say we're going to move over to a different religious tradition here and talk about?
Yeah, they're Muslims.
Sufis? Okay.
Yeah. Fakirs. They have a lot of similarities with sadhus. They're also wandering itinerant religious ascetics. They're Muslims. Now, if you get into British sources will all the time use the word fakir to refer to Hindus.
Yeah, it just sort of blurs it.
Yeah, they didn't really care whether they were getting the terms quite correct, but technically speaking, fakirs are Muslims.
Got it. Okay. That was everything I had. We covered a good deal of ground in our past 40 minutes. Is there anything else to go over that, a little punch list for somebody about sadhus so they know what they're talking about?
I think that was a fairly good overview. Yeah, the main thing is they're just they're essentially monks. They're Hindu sworn lifelong renunciates who are just specializing in attaining moksha. They've renounced other goals. And the details were going to vary widely in terms of what what they wear, if anything, what kind of practices they do. It varies pretty widely between the different orders.
Well, thank you so much for, answering all these frequently asked questions. And we'll no doubt talk about something again very soon. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's it for this episode of That's So Hindu. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it now with someone who you think will like it too. Please also like, follow, and or subscribe to this show on whatever platform you're listening to it on. You can help ensure that more of these get made by making a donation to HAF at www.hinduamerican.org/donate. Thanks again for listening.